There are certain moments that sneak up on you, not with the rush of fate or the thunderclap of destiny, but with a quiet ache, like the shiver that runs through Austin on the first real December wind. Natalie Brooks had grown used to that quiet ache. She could carry it, hide it, tuck it into the seams of her daily routines, and let it linger in the quiet hours after sunset. Yet, nothing prepared her for what she'd find in the busy, blustery parking lot of Target on the Saturday before Christmas. The lot was chaos, as always in the season's last stretch. People pushed carts loaded with boxes and paper and hopeful faces, scrambling to grab last gifts before the stores closed. Car horns, impatient, the whir and click of cartwheels. Natalie parked near the edge, in the row facing a fringe of tired evergreens the city had tried to string with half-lit bulbs. She sat for a moment in the driver's seat, knuckles white on the wheel, bracing herself for the crowds, for the forced cheer, for the small talk she'd have to pretend to enjoy. It was then she noticed the cart. Not just any cart. This one was alone, askew in the wind, a battered wire frame nearly touching the red-painted cart corral. There was something inside, a vague shape tucked under a faded blue towel. The towel was the wrong kind of blue for Christmas. Not cheerful, but washed out, threadbare, and something about it, the way it was draped, the way it barely moved, pulled at Natalie's attention. She watched for a second, the engine ticking, cold breath fogging the glass. She almost left it. She almost got out, hurried past, let the store's warmth swallow her up. But loss changes you, sharpens your eyes for small, broken things. Natalie climbed out, letting the winter air bite at her cheeks, and walked over. The towel shifted slightly as she approached, and now she could see the eyes. Small, dark, shining with something like fear, or maybe just exhaustion. She knelt beside the cart. Under the towel was a puppy. No more than 8 weeks old by the look of him, fur a tangled mess of black and tan, paws too big for his thin legs. A German shepherd, unmistakable even as a baby. He was shivering, pressed hard against the plastic basket, clutching something to his chest. Natalie looked closer and saw it. A little blue elephant plush, frayed at the seams, one ear nearly chewed through. "Hey there, buddy," she whispered, careful not to spook him. "What are you doing out here?" The puppy didn't answer. Of course not. But there was something strange in his stillness. Most dogs, abandoned or lost, would bark, whimper, cower, or even try to bolt. This one just stared, silent, wide-eyed. His tiny chest heaved with shallow breaths. Natalie searched the cart. No note, no bag of food, not even a collar. Nothing to mark where he'd come from or who might have left him. Only the puppy, the blue elephant, in those watchful, unmoving eyes. A woman hurried past with her arms full of wrapping paper, glancing at Natalie kneeling in the cold. "Did you lose your dog?" she called, barely slowing. Natalie shook her head, but the woman was already gone. For a moment, Natalie considered calling the store, animal control, someone. But she couldn't leave. Not yet. She glanced back at her car, at the river of shoppers, and then lowered herself to sit cross-legged on the cold concrete beside the cart. Minutes ticked by. The wind picked up, making the towel flutter. Still, the puppy didn't move, except to tighten his grip on the elephant. Natalie pulled her scarf tighter around her neck and watched him, heart pounding in a slow, dull rhythm. She wondered if he'd been here all night. She wondered who could leave something so small, so obviously loved, in a shopping cart on the edge of winter. She waited. The cars came and went. Families swept past. Headlights cut through the dusk. Somewhere, a child wailed. Somewhere else, laughter erupted as a group of teenagers tossed a football between bumpers. Natalie stayed, legs growing numb, feeling time slide past her. Occasionally, someone looked her way, then quickly looked away. No one wanted to get involved in whatever odd story might be playing out here. She tried reaching out a hand, but the puppy didn't flinch, didn't growl or retreat. He just watched her. Unblinking? For a moment, Natalie thought she saw herself reflected in those eyes. A quiet, stubborn hurt that couldn't be put into words. She understood that kind of silence. It was the same silence that had settled in her apartment since the miscarriage. The same silence that crept into her dreams and made waking up in the morning a slow, careful thing. "Okay," she whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." The sky began to darken, the lights flickering on above the store, casting long shadows over the pavement. Natalie pulled her scarf off, folded it, and laid it gently beside the puppy in the cart. "It's not much, but it's warmer than that towel," she murmured. For the first time, the puppy moved just a little. He sniffed the scarf, eyes never leaving Natalie's face. Then, trembling, he inched forward, dragging the blue elephant with him until his nose touched the soft wool. She could see him weighing his options, fear and hope battling in his small frame. He settled finally, half on the scarf, half on the towel, blue elephant clutched between his teeth. Natalie sat with him as the last shoppers hurried in and out of Target, as the cold deepened and the lot began to empty. She watched the puppy, and he watched her back, and something old and aching in her heart shifted, just slightly, toward hope. She knew, as the hours passed and the stars blinked on over Austin, that she couldn't leave him. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, in this unlikely corner of the world, the two of them would simply wait. Silent, watching, present. Natalie wasn't sure how long she had been sitting in the cold beside that cart, but when she finally stirred, she felt the stiffness in her legs and the ache in her back. Night had closed in around the Target parking lot. The last shouts and laughs of shoppers had faded. A row of street lamps flickered on, dusting the asphalt with the pools of golden light. She looked down at the puppy. He was still there, clutching the blue elephant, eyes half shut but never fully relaxed, as if he was afraid to let his guard down, even for a second. For a moment, Natalie let her hand hover over his head, hesitant. She'd always loved animals, but there was something different about this one. Something fragile she didn't want to break. Her scarf, now a nest under his thin body, seemed to have become a tiny island of safety between them. The night air pressed in, sharper now. And she knew she couldn't leave him. Not here, not alone. Something inside her, the part that had cracked months ago and hadn't healed, felt this was the first time she could help, really help, since her loss. "Okay, buddy?" she whispered, her voice nearly trembling. "It's time to go home." Very slowly, she extended her hand, palm up, offering it for him to sniff. The puppy watched her with wary eyes, his small chest rising and falling. He edged forward, sniffing her fingers, the blue elephant still pinned under his chin. When he didn't flinch or pull away, Natalie reached out, fingers brushing through the soft fur behind his ears. He was shivering, but he didn't try to escape. Instead, he nudged her hand with his nose, almost as if asking what would come next. Natalie gently bundled him up in her scarf, in the towel, making sure the blue elephant was tucked safely against his side. She lifted him from the cart, feeling how impossibly light he was, just bones and fur and worry. As she cradled him to her chest, he whimpered once, a tiny sound that seemed to hold a world of fear and uncertainty. But he didn't fight her. He just pressed himself tighter into her arms, eyes shut now, trusting her for reasons he probably didn't understand. The walk to her car felt longer than usual. Natalie glanced around, hoping no one would question her about the puppy or accuse her of taking someone's lost pet. But the lot was mostly empty, and nobody paid attention to a woman in a bundled-up ball of fur hurrying through the cold. She opened the back seat, set the puppy down gently, and climbed in beside him. For a moment, she sat there, heart racing. Was she really doing this? Was she ready for this responsibility, especially after all she'd lost? She reached over and stroked the puppy's side, feeling his thin ribs and the rapid flutter of his heartbeat. He relaxed a little, his small body curling around the blue elephant. Natalie took a steadying breath, started the car, and began the short drive home. Her apartment was a warm cocoon of quiet when she finally arrived, the faint glow of Christmas lights reflecting off the window. She set the puppy down in the living room, his towel and scarf forming a makeshift bed. He didn't explore, didn't bark or whine. He just sat where she placed him. Blue Elephant gripped tightly, big eyes watching every move she made. Natalie knelt beside him, remembering what her therapist once said. Sometimes you have to let grief share your space until it decides to leave. She wondered if the puppy was grieving too, if maybe that's why he was so silent, so still. Maybe he was waiting for someone who wouldn't come back. Maybe he was trying to learn how to belong again, just as she was. She filled a bowl with water, set it down nearby, and opened a can of chicken breast, the only protein she had on hand. The puppy didn't move at first, but after a minute, he edged towards the food, sniffed, and began to eat, slowly and methodically. Natalie watched in relief, feeling a strange sense of pride in his small act of courage. She settled on the floor, close enough to reassure him, but not so close as to crowd him. For a while they sat in companionable silence, broken only by the sound of soft chewing and the hum of the heater. When he finished eating, the puppy looked up at her, his eyes softer now. He edged forward, climbed awkwardly into her lap, still clutching the blue elephant, and settled there, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Natalie stroked his head, letting her fingers trail through the downy fur between his ears. You need a name? She murmured, her voice low. Something strong, but not too big for you. Something that means you're safe now. She thought for a moment, sifting through childhood memories and favorite stories. Then it came to her. Grover, she said, smiling despite herself. You look like a Grover. The puppy, Grover, let out a tiny sigh and nestled deeper into her lap. Natalie felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but for the first time in months, she didn't look away from them. She let them come, quiet and slow, while Grover's warmth seeped into her bones. As the night deepened, Natalie carried Grover to the bedroom, setting him up on a soft blanket near her bed. He didn't fuss, didn't whine for attention. He simply curled up, Blue Elephant clutched to his chest, and drifted into sleep. Natalie lay in bed, listening to the even rhythm of his breathing, and wondered at the strange comfort she felt in his presence. It was as if her apartment, so recently filled with sorrow, was changing shape, making space for hope again. In the days that followed, and Natalie quickly learned that Grover was not like other puppies. He never barked, never chewed the furniture, never made a mess. He trailed her from room to room, always a step behind, the blue elephant his constant companion. If she stopped to do the dishes, he sat at her feet, watching. If she read on the couch, he nestled beside her, eyes fixed on her face. Her friends, curious about the sudden addition to her life, began to visit. He's so quiet, Sarah remarked one afternoon, watching Grover watch the world from a patch of sunlight. Is he sick? Or just really, really mellow? Natalie shook her head. He's just watchful. I think he's trying to understand everything before he lets himself relax. At night, Grover slept by the foot of her bed, sometimes whimpering in his dreams, paws twitching as if he were running toward or away from something. Natalie would wake and soothe him, whispering nonsense words and gentle promises that tomorrow would be better. With each passing day, Natalie found herself talking to Grover more, about the weather, her work, her memories, her loss. She told him things she hadn't told anyone else, secrets she'd kept buried even from herself. In return, Grover listened, silent but attentive, his eyes full of the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. She realized, slowly, that she was healing, not because the pain was gone, but because she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. Grover was there, steady, present, always with his blue elephant and his quiet watchfulness. In caring for him, she was learning to care for herself again. And so, their days took on a gentle rhythm. Natalie would wake to find Grover waiting patiently, blue elephant in his mouth. She would whisper his name, and he would wag his tail, just a little, as if to say, I'm here. We're okay. And for the first time in a long time, Natalie believed him. It didn't take long for Natalie to realize that Grover wasn't like any puppy she'd ever known. Not even close. The first few days together felt almost surreal, like living with a tiny shadow that never made a sound. When she'd read about puppies before, everything was about the chaos. Chewing, yipping, tearing through the house with reckless energy. But Grover, he was gentle, almost invisible in his movements. Always close enough to touch, but never demanding, as if he'd learned early that silence and stillness were safer than joy. Each morning, Natalie would wake to the sound of nothing. No barking, no scratching at the door, just Grover, perched at the edge of her bed on his blanket, blue elephant wedged under one paw. He'd watch her with those soulful, dark eyes, never looking away. Sometimes it unnerved her, the intensity of his gaze, but mostly she found it oddly comforting. For someone who had spent so many weeks feeling like she was drifting in a gray, weightless world, Grover's steady presence felt like an anchor. She tried to coax him into puppy games, rolling a tennis ball, tossing a rope toy, and even squeaking the elephant to see if he'd respond. But Grover just watched, head tilted, as if he was trying to puzzle out what she wanted from him. Every once in a while, he'd nudge a toy with his nose, almost apologetically, but his heart wasn't in it. He preferred to follow Natalie from room to room, padding silently after her as she worked in the kitchen or tidied up. If she paused for a moment, Grover would sit at her feet and look up, waiting for something her friends started to notice. Sarah stopped by with coffee one Sunday afternoon, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the little German shepherd curled in a sunbeam. "He's adorable, Nat," she said, setting the mugs on the table. "But I swear I haven't heard him make a single sound since I got here." Natalie smiled, shrugging. "He's quiet. That's just how he is. He barely even barks at the vacuum, and he's never once whined to go out." Sarah knelt, holding her hand out for Grover to sniff. He approached, cautious but calm, and gently rested his chin in her palm. Sarah glanced at Natalie, eyebrows raised. You know, a lot of people would say he's damaged, like he's been through something." Natalie shook her head, feeling a protective heat rise in her chest. "I don't think he's damaged. He's just watching. He listens to everything. He pays attention." She didn't say what she was really thinking, that Grover reminded her of herself, especially in the weeks after her miscarriage, when the world had felt far too loud and she'd craved silence like a blanket. There had been days when even the smallest noise made her flinch, days when she'd sat perfectly still, just listening to her own heartbeat and trying to make sense of the emptiness inside. Grover's quietness began to change her, too. At first, Natalie worried she was doing something wrong. Wasn't a puppy supposed to be a source of joy and energy? Wasn't he supposed to bounce and bark and make her laugh? But after a while, she realized she didn't miss the chaos. There was something deeply calming about Grover's presence, as if his stillness was teaching her a new way to move through her own pain. She started taking him for long walks around the neighborhood, hoping the fresh air and new scents might awaken some of his puppy playfulness. But Grover never pulled on the leash, never lunged at squirrels or barked at passing dogs. He just walked quietly by her side, observing everything, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the flutter of birds overhead, the distant shouts of children playing. Occasionally he would stop, ears perked, to listen to a sound she couldn't hear, but he always looked back to make sure she was still there. It became a ritual. Every evening after work, they'd circle the block, Natalie letting the day's worries melt away as she matched Grover's slow, steady pace. Sometimes she would talk to him, telling him about her day, her thoughts, her grief. He never interrupted, never judged. He just listened, those soft brown eyes shining with a kind of wisdom that felt much older than his few months of life. One night, as they walked past a neighbor's yard, Natalie noticed an older man sitting on his porch. The man nodded in greeting. "That's a good dog you got there," he said. "Smart one, as I can tell." Natalie smiled, feeling a surprising rush of pride. Yeah, he is. He's quiet, but he's always paying attention. The man nodded again, rocking in his chair. Sometimes that's the best kind. World's too noisy already. When they got home, Grover curled up at Natalie's feet as she settled onto the couch with a book. She reached down, running her fingers through his soft fur, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of calm settling over her. A sense that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't so alone. As days passed, Natalie's friends continued to offer advice, sometimes helpful, sometimes not. You should get him checked for trauma, one said. Maybe he needs a behaviorist, another offered. Natalie nodded, considering each suggestion, but ultimately trusting her instincts. She could see in Grover's eyes that he wasn't broken, just learning to trust, just learning to be. She started to notice little changes. Grover would sometimes wag his tail, a tiny, hesitant movement, when she came home from work. If she sat quietly in the kitchen, he would edge closer, eventually resting his head on her foot as if to say, "I'm here." He'd even let out a soft, contented sigh on occasion, a sound so rare that Natalie cherished it every time. One morning, as Natalie poured her coffee, Grover appeared at her side, blue elephant in his mouth. He dropped it at her feet and sat down, looking up expectantly. Natalie bent down, picked up the toy, and handed it back to him. He took it gently, almost reverently, and lay down at her feet. She smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of gratitude. She realized, in that moment, that Grover had given her something she hadn't even known she needed. A sense of calm, a sense of being seen. She understood now that healing didn't always come in big, dramatic moments. Sometimes it arrived slowly, in the quiet companionship of a dog who simply refused to leave your side. As the days grew shorter and the weather turned colder, Natalie found herself looking forward to the silent hours she spent with Grover. Oh, they didn't need words or noise or excitement. They just needed each other. A woman learning to heal, and a puppy who had already survived more than he could ever show. And in their stillness, something beautiful began to grow. It was the second Sunday of January when Sarah dropped by, her arms full, not just with her usual iced coffee and a grocery bag of essentials, but with a little girl trailing close behind. The girl was maybe 6 or 7, all elbows and skinny knees, her tangled hair falling in front of wary eyes. Natalie had seen her only once before, months ago, when Sarah first took her in as a foster placement. This time, the girl's silence was even heavier, her gaze fixed on the ground as if the floor might swallow her up if she looked up too long. Grover, as always, was stationed on his blanket beside the living room window, the blue elephant tucked beneath his chin. He watched the door with his usual calm intensity, eyes flicking from Sarah to the girl, reading every movement in the room. Natalie stepped aside to let them in, her heart immediately softening at the sight of the child's hunched shoulders. "Hey, Nat," Sarah said, with a tired but genuine smile. She set the bag down on the kitchen counter, then gently placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "This is Emma. She wanted to come out today." Emma didn't respond, didn't even lift her head. Natalie crouched to meet her, at eye level, trying not to crowd her. "Hey, Emma. I'm Natalie. It's nice to see you again. Do you remember Grover?" At the sound of his name, Grover stirred. Instead of bounding over, he stood slowly, shaking out his fur, and approached Emma with deliberate care, each step measured, cautious. He stopped a foot away, sat, and tilted his head as if to say, "It's okay. I'll wait." Natalie held her breath, watching the tiny standoff. Emma's fists clenched tighter. She edged back behind Sarah's coat, a living shadow. But Grover didn't give up. He stayed perfectly still, his eyes gentle, his presence undemanding. After a minute that felt like 10, Emma risked a quick glance. Grover didn't move. Then, with infinite patience, he lay down, placing his chin on his paws, and let out a slow sigh, as if he had all the time in the world. Natalie felt something shift in the room, a hush that was almost reverent. For the first time, Emma's shoulders dropped, just slightly. Her eyes darted to Grover, lingered, and then retreated again. Sarah and Natalie exchanged glances, both sensing it. A door, not open, but maybe unlocked. "I brought coloring books," Sarah offered, trying to keep her tone light. She unpacked markers and snacks onto the coffee table. Emma let herself be led to the couch, but kept her distance from both women. Grover, respecting her boundaries, stayed put, watching quietly. Natalie joined Sarah in the kitchen, speaking in a low voice. "She seems even more withdrawn than last time?" Sarah nodded, eyes worried. It's sure tough. She's seen such a lot, and trust doesn't come easy, but she wanted to come today. She asked about Grover, actually. She said he didn't try to touch her, that he just waited. Natalie smiled at that, glancing over at Grover. "He's good at waiting." As the afternoon wore on, the apartment filled with the muffled sounds of crayons on paper, the scent of popcorn, the clink of coffee mugs. Emma didn't speak, but she watched Grover from the corner of her eye. Grover seemed to know exactly how much space to give her. At one point, when Emma shifted to sit cross-legged on the rug, Grover rose and moved a little closer, just close enough that his tail touched her knee. He paused, waiting for a reaction. When Emma didn't flinch, he settled beside her and rested his head on her foot. The effect was immediate and profound. Emma froze, tense as a bowstring, but then something in her posture softened. She didn't move her foot away. She let Grover stay there, the weight of his head a gentle anchor in a world that too often spun out of her control. Sarah's mouth dropped open in surprise. "He's not just calm, he's tuned in. Therapy material, Nat. Seriously, this is something special." Natalie felt her chest tighten, pride and awe mixing in equal measure. "He's always been like that. He senses things. He just knows." The room was quiet for a long while. Emma picked up a marker, drawing careful lines across the page, her free hand unconsciously tangling in Grover's fur. Grover remained perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing steady. Natalie wondered at the trust it took for both of them to let this happen. For a child who flinched from every touch, and for a puppy who had survived abandonment to find comfort in each other's nearness. Eventually, Emma spoke. Just 2 words, so quiet Natalie almost missed them. "He's soft?" Sarah and Natalie exchanged glances, relief blooming on both faces. "Yeah," Natalie answered softly. "He's the softest." Emma didn't say anything else. But when it was time to go, she knelt and hugged Grover, burying her face in his fur. Grover licked her cheek once, so gently Natalie's eyes burned with sudden tears. Sarah wrapped Emma in her coat and thanked Natalie, her voice thick with emotion. After they left, the apartment felt quieter than before, but not empty. Grover returned to his blanket, Blue Elephant safely by his side. Natalie sat beside him, running her hand over his back. "You did good today," she murmured. "You helped." Grover looked up at her, eyes shining with a kind of quiet understanding. Natalie realized that she, too, had found something she hadn't known she was looking for. A sense of purpose, a connection that went beyond words. She had watched Grover offer comfort without asking for anything in return. She had seen Emma's walls come down, even if just for a moment, and she felt, maybe for the first time since her loss, that healing wasn't just possible, but already underway. That night, as Natalie prepared for bed, she thought about how much had changed in just a few short weeks. She glanced at Grover, sleeping soundly with his elephant, and whispered, "Maybe you're meant for more than just being my dog." The thought lingered, sweet and terrifying. She made a mental note to look into therapy dog training in the morning. Outside, the winter wind rattled the windows. Inside, Natalie and Grover rested in a new kind of peace. A peace built from small, silent moments, from patience and gentle trust. And as she drifted off to sleep, Natalie let herself believe that tomorrow would bring even more reasons to hope. The morning after Emma's visit, Natalie woke to a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. As she lay in bed, the early sun crept across her comforter in golden bars, painting warmth over the cool hush of winter. Grover was at his usual place, at the foot of the bed, Blue Elephant snug under his chin. But today, Natalie saw something new in his posture, a kind of peacefulness, as if he knew he had done something important. Emma's shy hug, the child's trust in Grover's silence, echoed in Natalie's mind as she made coffee. She replayed that quiet moment again and again, feeling the truth of Sarah's words. He's therapy material, Nat. At first, Natalie had brushed it off, thinking of all the rules and tests, all the expectations, and wondering if it was really possible. But now, as Grover nosed at her ankle and looked up with those soulful eyes, she felt a calling that was stronger than doubt. After breakfast, Natalie opened her laptop and began researching therapy dog programs in Austin. She scrolled through websites, reading testimonials about dogs changing lives, comforting children with cancer, bringing light to the elderly, helping survivors of trauma rediscover trust. Every story reminded her of Emma, of herself, and of the quiet way Grover entered broken spaces and filled them with something like hope. It wasn't long before she found a beginner class at a local community center, scheduled to start in 2 weeks. Without letting herself hesitate, she signed them up. That afternoon, Natalie leashed Grover and walked him to the neighborhood park. She paid special attention to his reactions. How he never pulled ahead or lagged behind, how he watched every jogger, stroller, and squirrel with patient curiosity, but never lunged, or barked. A small child dropped her juice box and burst into tears on the sidewalk. Grover froze, head cocked, and then sat, tail wagging gently, as if he was trying to offer reassurance. The girl stopped crying. Her mother smiled at Natalie, then at Grover, and said, "He's got a way about him, doesn't he?" Natalie nodded. "He really does." On the way home, Natalie talked to Grover the way she always did, sharing her thoughts out loud. "We're going to try something new," she said. "It'll be scary, but I think you're ready." "I think I'm ready, too." Grover, as always, didn't reply, but when she stopped to adjust her scarf, he pressed his nose into her hand as if to say, "I'm with you." The following days were filled with small changes. Natalie bought Grover a new harness and a soft brush, determined to help him look his best for training. She read articles on therapy dog etiquette and practiced basic commands: sit, stay, come, and gentle. Grover picked them up with remarkable speed, as if he already understood the rules of gentleness and patience that therapy work required. Meanwhile, something inside Natalie began to shift. For so long, her grief had been a silent, unspoken weight, too heavy to share with anyone but Grover. But as they practiced together, as she watched him comfort strangers, Natalie found herself talking more openly, to Grover, to Sarah, even to herself. She admitted out loud that she missed the child she'd lost. She said the words, miscarriage, in grief, and each time it felt less like a wound and more like a part of her story. The day of their first therapy class arrived cold and bright. Natalie dressed in her warmest coat and loaded Grover into the car, the Blue Elephant tucked in his harness, for luck. The community center was bustling with people and dogs of every shape and size. Some barked and strained at their leashes. Others cowered behind their handlers. Natalie felt her nerves spike as they signed in. But Grover stood by her side, silent and steady. The instructor, a tall woman named Denise, with a patient smile, gathered everyone in a circle. Therapy work is about calm, about connection, and about intuition, she explained. It's not about tricks or obedience, but about trust. Yours and your dog's. She smiled at Grover, who watched her with polite attention. Some dogs are born with it, some learn it. All of them need encouragement. The session began with basic exercises, walking in circles, ignoring distractions, making eye contact. Grover moved with quiet confidence. When a loud crash startled one of the smaller dogs, Grover didn't flinch. He sat and waited, gaze fixed on Natalie. Denise knelt beside him, stroking his head. He's got an old soul, she said softly. Has he been through something? Natalie felt her throat tighten, but she nodded. We both have. After class, Natalie and Grover sat outside under a tree, watching the wind chase leaves across the parking lot. Natalie felt lighter than she had in months. "You did great," she whispered, stroking Grover's ears. He leaned into her touch, eyes closed. Blue elephant at his side. Grover's progress was remarkable. Week after week, he passed every test, staying calm around wheelchairs, ignoring sudden noises, greeting strangers with a gentle nudge. Natalie found herself opening up more during class discussions, sharing bits of her story, her loss, her loneliness, her hope that Grover could help others the way he'd helped her. Each time she spoke, the group listened, nodding in understanding. She realized she wasn't the only one searching for healing. Eventually, Grover and Natalie began visiting local children's hospitals as part of the program's supervised outings. The first time they entered the ward, Natalie's hands shook with nerves. The bright, antiseptic halls felt overwhelming, but Grover was her anchor. He moved quietly from bed to bed, allowing each child to approach him on their own terms. Some reached for his soft fur immediately. Others watched from a distance, eyes wary. But Grover never pushed. He would sit, silent and patient, until even the shyest children inched closer. One little girl with bandaged arms asked, "Why doesn't he bark?" Natalie knelt beside her. "He's just a good listener," she replied. "Sometimes listening helps more than anything." The girl nodded, smiling, and Grover rested his chin on her knee. Word spread quickly, and soon Natalie and Grover received invitations to visit therapy centers and trauma shelters. Each visit brought new challenges, new faces, new wounds, some visible, some hidden. But Grover approached each encounter with the same quiet grace, never asking for anything, always offering his gentle presence. Natalie noticed the way staff and families would relax when he entered the room, the way his silence filled even the most anxious spaces with calm. For Natalie, these visits became their own kind of therapy. She learned to recognize her own strength in Grover's patience, to see her own growth mirrored in his calm resilience. She found herself talking more openly about her loss, her journey, and her hope for the future. The more she shared, the less her grief defined her. One evening, after a particularly emotional visit at the shelter, Natalie knelt beside Grover in their apartment, tears running down her cheeks. "You're not just my dog, Grover," she whispered. "You're part of every story now. You're helping them heal, and you're helping me, too." Grover looked up at her, his eyes full of understanding. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. And as Natalie wrapped her arms around him, she realized that healing wasn't about forgetting the past or erasing the pain. It was about sharing it, letting it breathe, and allowing love, quiet, steadfast love, to fill the empty spaces. With Grover at her side, she was finally learning to believe in hope again. And together, they walked forward, one gentle step at a time. Natalie had always believed in small miracles, though she rarely used the word out loud. She'd seen enough pain, her own and others, to understand that healing wasn't something that came all at once, but in moments, scattered like bright coins through ordinary days. Still, there were days when something shifted, something unexplainable happened, and you just knew it was bigger than luck or routine. For Natalie, one such day arrived on a rainy Thursday at the Children's Hospice. It was Grover's 5th official visit as a therapy dog. By now, his reputation had spread through the hospital halls. Staff greeted him with wide smiles and waves. Children pressed their faces to the windows as he walked by. And parents, so tired, so hopeful, seemed to breathe a little easier just seeing him. Grover never seemed to mind the attention. He just walked patiently beside Natalie, blue elephant toy dangling from his mouth, the symbol of his silent comfort. The hospice was quieter than usual that day, the rain muting every sound. Natalie checked in at the nurse's station, heart beating with the usual mix of anticipation and anxiety. She never quite got used to the heaviness of these halls, the way grief and love clung to every wall, the way hope fought with fear for every child's future. The director, a gentle woman named Mrs. Keene, met them with a warm hug. "There's a new boy in room 12, she said quietly. Uh, he's had a rough week. He doesn't speak much. Would you mind starting there?" Natalie squeezed her hand and nodded. "Of course." They walked down the corridor, Grover's nails clicking softly on the tile. At room 12, Natalie paused. She knew not to rush, knew how hard it could be to let a stranger into your world when you'd lost so much already. She knocked gently, peeked inside, and found a small boy sitting cross-legged on the bed, back pressed against the wall, eyes fixed on the window as if searching for a way out. "Hi, Ben," she said softly. "My name is Natalie. This is Grover. We're just here to visit. Is it okay if we come in?" The boy didn't answer, didn't look away from the window. Natalie took that as a maybe. She stepped inside, Grover following. The room was filled with the smell of rain and hospital soap, the windows streaked with water. Grover paused, sensing the tension, then sat at the foot of the bed, blue elephant gripped gently in his mouth. Natalie pulled a chair up near the bed, but didn't sit yet. "Grover's here to keep you company," she said. "He's really good at listening, even when you don't want to talk." Wait. Ben's eyes darted to Grover for a split second, then back to the window. The silence stretched. Natalie sat, letting the quiet settle. She knew better than to fill the space with words. Instead, she just watched Grover, who was as still as she'd ever seen him, head cocked, waiting for a sign. Minutes passed. The rain tapped the glass, soothing and persistent. Natalie caught herself holding her breath. She wondered if this would be one of those visits where nothing happened on the outside, but everything happened somewhere deeper, in a place no one could see. 10 minutes went by before Ben moved at all. He slid his gaze from the window to Grover, curiosity flickering in his eyes, and Grover, as if waiting for this exact moment, gently set the blue elephant down on the floor. He nosed it across the linoleum, inch by inch, until it bumped against the bed frame. Then, he looked up at Ben and waited. Something cracked in the boy's expression, an uncertainty, a longing, a question. Natalie saw it and felt her heart ache. Ben hesitated, then leaned forward, reaching down to lift the blue elephant into his lap. He stared at the toy as if he'd never seen anything so soft before, running his fingers over its worn fabric and frayed ear. The room went impossibly quiet. Natalie wanted to say something to reassure, but she held back. This was Grover's moment, not hers. Ben's shoulders began to tremble. At first, Natalie thought he was cold, but then she saw the tears, silent, unstoppable, rolling down his cheeks and soaking the blue elephant. He hugged the toy to his chest, trying to stifle his sobs. For a long moment, Natalie simply watched, her own eyes burning. Grief and comfort mingled in the small, hunched figure on the bed. Finally, through gasping breaths, Ben whispered, "Thank you." Natalie blinked back tears and smiled. "You're welcome," she said softly, but she knew the thanks wasn't really for her. Grover stayed at the foot of the bed, tail wagging slowly, as if he knew his job was done. For the rest of the visit, Ben didn't speak again, but he didn't let go of the elephant, not even when the nurse came in to check his vitals. When it was time to leave, Ben looked up, eyes red but brighter than before. He held the elephant out toward Grover, almost apologetic. Natalie knelt down. "You can keep it for a while," she said. "Grover wanted you to have it." The relief on Ben's face was immediate. He nodded, clutching the toy. As Natalie and Grover left the room, the nurse gave Natalie a silent thumbs up, tears glimmering in her eyes. In the hallway, Natalie knelt beside Grover and wrapped her arms around his neck. "You did something amazing, buddy," she whispered, her voice shaky. Grover nuzzled her cheek, accepting the praise with quiet grace. As they moved through the rest of the hospice, Natalie found herself telling the story to every nurse and parent who asked why Grover's blue elephant was missing. She told them about Ben, about the silent exchange, about how sometimes the smallest gesture could break through the hardest silence. That night, back home, Natalie placed Grover's other toys on his blanket. He sniffed at them, but ignored them, circling once before settling down. Natalie sat beside him, stroking his fur, thinking about the power of a simple act of giving. The next day, Mrs. Keene called. Ben hasn't let go of that elephant. He sleeps with it, talks to it. He told his mother, Grover gave it to me when I was sad. I thought you should know. Natalie closed her eyes, emotion welling up. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. For the first time since finding Grover in that Target parking lot, Natalie understood the true meaning of healing, not just for Ben, but for herself too. Sometimes comfort didn't come in the form of words or medicine or even time. Sometimes it came in the form of a battered blue elephant nudged across a hospital floor by a dog who knew, without ever being told, exactly what a broken heart needed. And sometimes that was enough. The weeks after Grover's silent gift to Ben passed in a blur of new faces and old wounds. Word about Grover, the gentle dog with the missing blue elephant, spread through the community like a quiet rumor that brought hope wherever it landed. Every Thursday, Natalie and Grover drove to another hospital, therapy center, or shelter. Each visit was different, but the feeling was always the same. Tension at first, then gradually the air softening, voices gentling, walls coming down. By now, Grover had become something of a legend among the nurses and staff. Though he never seemed to notice the attention, he moved through each day with the same patient grace, unhurried, his focus always on the person in front of him. Natalie marveled at how he sensed which child needed a gentle nudge and which needed space. It was as if he could read sadness, anger, and fear the way other dogs sniffed out treats. But it was during a late winter visit to the youth crisis shelter, a place Natalie herself felt nervous entering, that Grover would face his greatest test yet. It was a gray afternoon, cold and damp. The shelter was a former school building, its hallways echoing with the distant thump of basketballs, the hum of voices both angry and tired. Natalie checked in with the front desk, then followed a volunteer to a group room where several teenagers sat in mismatched chairs, arms folded, eyes wary. Grover walked at Natalie's side, his gait steady, nose twitching at the mingled scents of cleaning fluid and cafeteria food. The room quieted as they entered. Natalie introduced herself, but most of the teens barely looked up. Grover sat beside her, ears forward, eyes scanning the group. The volunteer, a soft-spoken man named Jamie, nodded toward the farthest chair. That's Jade, he whispered. She's having a hard time today. Natalie's eyes followed Jamie's gesture. Jade was maybe 15 or 16, with messy hair dyed a vivid teal, heavy eyeliner, and arms wrapped tight across her chest. The message was clear. Stay away. Natalie recognized that posture, that shield of anger, that she'd worn it herself once in the early days of grief. The group went through the motions. A few introductions, some forced jokes, a little awkward silence. Grover waited. When another girl shyly reached out to pet him, he responded with a gentle nuzzle. Natalie told a short, funny story about Grover's first snow day, earning a few reluctant smiles. But all the while, Jade remained motionless, her face blank, her gaze fixed on a spot above the door. After a while, Jade's irritation boiled over. Don't bother, she said, voice flat, directed at Grover. Dogs can't fix anything. Nobody can. The room froze. A few kids looked at Natalie as if expecting her to push or retreat. Instead, Natalie simply said, You're right. Dogs can't fix everything, but sometimes, they can just be here. Jade rolled her eyes, but Natalie thought she saw something flicker in her expression. A tiny tremor, quickly buried. Grover watched Jade for a long moment, then did something he'd never done before. He left Natalie's side, padded slowly across the room, and sat down right in front of Jade's chair. For a few seconds, Jade just stared at him, her face a mask. Then Grover lowered himself to the floor, resting his chin on his paws, eyes never leaving hers. He waited. Seconds ticked by, the air thick with expectation. Then, very slowly, Grover nudged something across the floor with his nose. It was a small, bright rubber ball Natalie had tucked in her pocket for him earlier, just in case. The ball bumped against Jade's foot. Grover looked at her, ears flicking forward. It wasn't the blue elephant. He had given that away forever. But it was the same offer, the same invitation. Here's something I care about. I want you to have it. Jade's lips parted, her eyes widening. She stared at the ball, then at Grover. The whole room held its breath. And then Jade broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. But her shoulders began to shake. She pressed her fists to her eyes, trying to hide her tears. But it was no use. She let out a broken, shuddering sob. And in that instant, Grover nudged even closer, resting his warm body against her leg. Natalie didn't say a word. She knew this was the moment Jade had to choose. Hold tight to the anger, or let the pain move through her, however messy it needed to be. Jade cried for a long time, her head bent, tears splattering onto her jeans. A few other teens looked away. Some shifted in their seats, but nobody said a thing. Jamie handed Natalie a box of tissues, and she quietly slid it toward Jade. Eventually Jade took one, wiped her face, and managed a shaky laugh. "Stupid dog," she muttered, her voice soft. Not angry now. Grover looked up at her, tail thumping once, then settled again. He didn't need praise. He didn't need thanks. His job was just to be there. The rest of the group session changed after that. Other kids spoke up. Nothing big, just small admissions about feeling scared or angry or lonely. Grover made his rounds, accepting pets and quiet words, always returning to Jade's side, as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, the group felt less like a collection of strangers and more like a circle of people trying to figure out how to hurt less. When it was time to go, Jade knelt down and hugged Grover, burying her face in his fur. She kept the rubber ball, rolling it between her palms as if it was some kind of lifeline. As Natalie and Grover walked back to the car, Jamie caught up with them outside. "I've never seen her let anyone in," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "I don't know how you do it." Natalie smiled, brushing a tear from her own cheek. "I don't. Grover does. He just knows when to give and when to wait." Driving home, Natalie watched Grover in the rearview mirror, curled up on the seat, content. She thought about the ways healing could look. Messy, quiet, unexpected. Sometimes it was about offering comfort. Sometimes it was about simply sitting with someone until they were ready to choose hope for themselves. That night, Natalie updated her journal, writing, "Today, Grover showed me that giving doesn't always mean letting go of what you love, but trusting that it will matter to someone else. Healing is a choice. Sometimes we just need a friend to show us how to make it." And in the hush that followed, as Grover settled in for the night, Natalie felt her own heart lighter, like she'd been given a gift too, just by witnessing it all. The weeks following Grover's encounter with Jade were a season of quiet transition, like the slow melt between winter and spring. A change you could feel, but couldn't quite see happening, until suddenly, everything was different. Natalie noticed the shift first, in Grover's eyes. He was still gentle, still watchful, but there was a new calmness, a kind of settled wisdom that made him seem both older and somehow lighter. He never sought out the blue elephant again. At first, Natalie thought it was just a fluke. She placed a few of his other toys on his blanket, an old squeaky fox, a rope, even a brand new stuffed lamb she picked up on a whim at the grocery store. Grover sniffed them politely, but none of them held his attention the way the blue elephant had. Every now and then, Natalie would try to coax him into playing, shaking the lamb or rolling the rope toward him. He would wag his tail, touch the toy with his nose, but after a moment he'd simply turn away, returning to his favorite spot by the window. For a few days, Natalie worried that something was wrong. She checked Grover's food and water, watched him on walks, felt for any sign of illness, but he was healthy. His eyes bright, his steps springy, his coat gleaming in the soft light of late afternoon. It was only the toys, specifically the absence of interest in any toy at all, that had changed. Then, one afternoon, as she was tidying up, Natalie found the blue elephant exactly where she'd left it, on the little shelf beside Grover's bed. It looked a little worn, one ear frayed beyond repair, a faint patch where Ben's tears had stained the fabric. Natalie picked it up, running her thumb along the seam, and felt an unexpected surge of emotion. It was more than a toy now. It was a marker of everything Grover had survived, everything he had given away. She sat on the edge of the bed, Grover hopping up beside her, and studied the elephant together. "You really did give it away, didn't you?" she said softly. Grover's tail thumped once. Then he pressed his head into her lap, eyes closing in trust. And Natalie knew, without question, that the act of giving the elephant had changed him. In that small gesture, Grover had let go of something, maybe his last bit of fear, or maybe the burden he'd been carrying since that cold night in the Target parking lot. From that day forward, the elephant stayed on the shelf, a quiet memorial. Natalie dusted it off every morning, sometimes catching herself staring at it and remembering all those first nights. Grover curled around it, refusing to let anyone else touch it. Now, Grover seemed content just to rest nearby, glancing at the shelf now and then, as if satisfied that it was still there, but no longer needing it close. As spring blossomed in Austin, Grover and Natalie kept up their routine of visits. Each hospital, shelter, and therapy center had new faces. Some excited, some anxious, all carrying their own invisible burdens. Grover moved through every space with his usual gentle confidence, but Natalie noticed he was even more attentive now, more present in each moment. If a child hesitated, Grover would simply wait, eyes calm and patient, until the child felt ready to reach out. If a parent cried quietly in a corner, Grover would sit at their feet, silenced, a comforting weight in a world that often felt too light and fragile. It was during a visit to the children's trauma shelter that Natalie saw the full impact of Grover's transformation. A little girl named Lila, who'd been at the shelter only a few days, refused to speak to anyone. She kept her head down, clutching a threadbare blanket, flinching at every loud sound. Grover approached her with infinite patience, sitting just out of reach, waiting. After nearly an hour, Lila inched closer, finally resting her tiny hand on his back. The staff watched in amazement, some with tears in their eyes. "He never pushes," one counselor whispered. "He just lets them come to him." Natalie smiled, pride swelling in her chest. "He's learned when to hold on and when to let go." The next morning, as Natalie made coffee and Grover lay at her feet, she realized she'd begun to change too. For so long, she'd clung to her own grief, keeping it close like a secret she wasn't ready to share. But seeing Grover let go of his elephant, watching him give away the thing he loved most so that someone else could heal, Natalie began to understand that letting go wasn't about forgetting or pretending the pain never existed. It was about making room for something new. She started to write again, not just in her private journal, but short notes and stories she shared with Sarah, the therapy group, even some of the staff she met on visits. She wrote about Grover's blue elephant, about the power of silent comfort, about the strength it took to give a part of yourself away for someone else's sake. Each time she shared a story, someone would reach out with their own, a memory, a heartbreak, a small triumph over pain. The stories connected them, thread by thread, weaving a network of kindness she'd never expected to find. One evening, Natalie sat on the porch with Grover at her side, the soft breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers from the yard. She watched the sun sink behind the rooftops, painting the world in gold and orange. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly peaceful. Not because she had no pain left, but because she'd made peace with its presence. She glanced at Grover, who looked up, eyes shining with that old, gentle wisdom. "We're okay, aren't we?" she murmured. Grover rested his head in her lap and sighed, a deep, contented sound that spoke more than words ever could. Inside, the blue elephant sat quietly on its shelf, a symbol not of loss, but of love freely given, of burdens released. Natalie realized then that letting go isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning. And together, she and Grover had made a life big enough to hold it all. The sorrow, the healing, and the hope for whatever came next. When Natalie sat down to write the blog post, she had no idea it would ripple so far. She titled it simply, "The Day the Elephant Left." And for the first time, she poured out every detail. The cold Austin evening, the abandoned cart, Grover's silent devotion to his battered blue elephant, and the moment he chose to give it away to a boy who needed it more. She wrote not just about Grover, but about what it meant to let go. How healing sometimes arrived quietly, without permission, in the form of patience, trust, and small, gentle sacrifices. Natalie posted it late at night, her heart fluttering with nerves. She wasn't sure anyone would care, or even understand why this story mattered so much to her. She only knew that writing it felt like setting something down that she'd carried alone for too long. By morning, the post had already started to spread. A nurse from the hospice commented first, sharing her memory of Ben and the blue elephant. Then a teacher from a trauma shelter wrote about how Grover's visits had calmed her most anxious students. Within days, hundreds of strangers had reached out, some sharing similar stories, some simply saying thank you, some asking if Grover could visit their school or hospital. Parents wrote about children who'd held onto a certain blanket or toy through chemo. A grandmother described her aging dog who never left her side after she lost her husband. Someone sent a picture of their rescue pup with a favorite teddy bear tucked under its chin. The comments section became a river of stories, some joyful, some heartbreaking, all threaded with the common hope that quiet comfort could matter more than words. Natalie found herself reading every message, sometimes laughing, sometimes wiping tears away, as she hadn't expected that telling her story would open a door for others to share theirs, or that she would feel less alone because of it. She began to recognize names. A teacher from Dallas, a nurse from Houston, a father in San Antonio. Every story was different, but every story echoed the lesson of Grover's blue elephant, that love, once given, kept moving, kept growing, passed from hand to hand, heart to heart. Requests for Grover's visits began to multiply. The local news reached out for an interview. A children's advocacy group wanted Natalie to speak about trauma and recovery. Sometimes Natalie felt overwhelmed. Her quiet life now full of invitations and possibilities she never could have imagined that night in the Target parking lot. But every time she felt uncertain, Grover seemed to sense it. He would rest his head on her knee or nudge her with his nose, reminding her that she didn't have to do any of it alone. One Saturday morning, Natalie and Grover were invited to a library for a Read to a Dog event. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Children holding well-worn books, parents chatting in low voices. As soon as Grover entered, the mood changed. He settled quietly onto his blanket, and the first child, shy and stuttering, sat down, book clutched tightly. She read one halting sentence, and then another. When her voice trembled, Grover nudged her elbow, steady as ever. By the end of the session, the girl was reading aloud, her confidence growing with every word. Parents thanked Natalie afterward, but she always said the same thing. "It's not me. It's just Grover being Grover." The blog post continued to travel. It was picked up by a national pet therapy organization, then a mental health magazine. Natalie received letters from as far away as Alaska and Maine. People wrote about losing loved ones and finding solace in small acts of kindness. A neighbor who left flowers, a dog who slept beside a child after a nightmare, a stranger who listened without judgment. Some letters were long, others only a single sentence. But each one, Natalie realized, was a testament to the invisible web of comfort that bound people together, even across distance, in pain. Encouraged by the response, Natalie agreed to share more of her story, this time her own loss. She wrote a follow-up post describing the miscarriage she'd hidden from most of the world and how Grover's arrival had marked the beginning of her healing. It was the hardest thing she'd ever shared, but when she clicked publish, She felt the same quiet relief she'd felt watching Grover give away his blue elephant, the sense that it was time to stop holding so much alone. The response was overwhelming. Messages flooded in from women and men who had grieved silently for years, from people who had never found the right words, from those who thanked Natalie for saying what they could not. The blog became a community, a gathering place for people to honor their pain, celebrate their progress, and hold space for others to heal. With each story shared, Natalie felt her own burdens lighten. She started volunteering at a grief support group, speaking not just about Grover, but about the courage it took to open up, to trust that pain could be transformed by kindness and presence. People began to call her, not just for therapy dog visits, but for advice, for comfort, for hope. Grover became a kind of symbol in the city. One day, Natalie received a drawing in the mail. A child's crayon sketch of a dog with big eyes and a blue elephant beneath a rainbow of hearts. It hung on her fridge, a reminder of all the lives their story had touched. She watched as Grover continued to thrive, his calm presence working quiet miracles everywhere they went. She saw how a silent dog could fill rooms with courage, how a worn-out toy could teach an entire community to reach out and care. Even now, when she passed the blue elephant on its shelf at home, Natalie felt a pang, not of sadness, but of gratitude for all that letting go had brought into her life. The echoes of that story grew louder every week. Sometimes Natalie would find herself walking with Grover in the park, watching the world wake up around them. And she'd think about how a single act of giving could change everything. She would kneel, hug Grover tight, and whisper, "Look what you've started, buddy. Look what you've done." And Grover, ever the silent companion, would press closer, as if he understood that the best stories are the ones that never really end. 1 year later, Austin wore winter quietly, soft snowflakes tumbling through the streetlights, turning the city's noise into a muffled memory. Natalie bundled her scarf around her neck, tugged her coat tighter, and watched her breath swirl in the air as she crossed the now familiar parking lot of Target. Grover trotted at her side, fur dusted with snow, every step deliberate and sure. He looked older now, still young, but with the calm dignity of a dog who'd seen sorrow, given comfort, and somehow helped people find hope again. Natalie hadn't planned to return here on this day. She'd meant only to pick up some groceries, maybe a new notebook. But as she watched Grover pause near the cart station, his nose lifted as if catching an old familiar scent, she felt the tug of memory stronger than she'd expected. It had been 12 months since she'd found him here, shivering in that battered cart, clutching his blue elephant with eyes full of questions and fear. 12 months since she'd carried him home and begun, without knowing it, to heal. The lot was mostly empty now. Christmas was past, and the world had slowed down, the city pausing to catch its breath. Natalie's boots crunched softly over a thin layer of ice as she made her way toward the row of carts. Grover at her side. Her heart ached with gratitude, pain and joy so tightly woven together, she could hardly tell them apart. Suddenly she noticed a figure standing at the far end of the cart station, a woman, maybe in her late 20s, hunched against the cold, shoulders shaking. From a distance, Natalie saw her clutching a phone to her ear, then slowly lowering it, wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. No one else seemed to notice. Cars rolled by, people hurried indoors, and the world spun on. But Natalie couldn't look away. She glanced at Grover, who had already stilled, eyes fixed on the woman with quiet attention. For a moment, Natalie remembered every moment of loneliness she'd carried, every silent plea for someone, anyone, to notice her pain. She stepped forward, her own memories heavy but grounding. As she reached the woman, Natalie hesitated. What if she didn't want help? What if she was just having a bad day and needed space? But then she saw Grover press forward, sitting close but not too close, offering his silent companionship. Natalie rested a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. "You're not alone," she said softly, her words floating in the hush of falling snow. The woman looked up, startled, tears frozen on her lashes. She took in Natalie's kind eyes, Grover's steady gaze, and for a moment something raw and real passed between them. a wordless recognition of sorrow and solidarity. The woman let out a shaky breath, hugging her coat tighter. It's been a hard year, she whispered. Natalie nodded, squeezing her shoulder. I know, she replied, her own voice trembling. Me too. But you'd be amazed how much difference a little kindness can make. Grover moved even closer, resting his head on the woman's knee. She smiled through her tears, reaching out to stroke his fur. He's beautiful, she murmured, her hand lingering. What's his name? Grover, Natalie answered. He's been through a lot, but he never gave up. And he's helped more people than he'll ever know. For a while, they stood together in the snowy silence, the chaos of the city held at bay by the fragile shelter of compassion. The woman's breathing slowed, her posture softening. Thank you, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Natalie smiled. You're welcome. And if you ever need to talk, I know what it's like to feel lost. I write a blog, actually. It's called The Day the Elephant Left. Maybe you'll find something there that helps? The woman nodded, a little hope blooming in her eyes. I will. Thank you, really. After the woman walked away, Natalie and Grover stood for a moment longer by the cart station. Natalie reached out, brushing her fingers over the cold metal, remembering that night. The fear, the uncertainty, the way a tiny, trembling puppy had changed everything. She realized that some scars never fully fade. But with time, kindness, and a little courage, they became part of a larger story, one with room for love, laughter, and new beginnings. On the way home, Natalie replayed the encounter in her mind, gratitude mixing with awe. She thought of Ben, Jade, Lila, and so many others whose paths had crossed Grover's. Children who learned to trust again, parents who found comfort, teenagers who let themselves cry. She thought of the emails, the letters, the drawings tacked to her refrigerator. All of it had grown from a moment in a parking lot. A moment she might have missed if she hadn't stopped, if she hadn't chosen compassion over convenience. That night, as snow dusted the city and the world seemed washed clean, Natalie curled up with Grover by the window. The blue elephant sat quietly on its shelf, a symbol not just of healing, but of the power of small acts to echo outward, changing lives in ways no one can predict. Natalie knew that Grover's story, her story, wasn't really about loss, or even about finding comfort. It was about the courage to reach out, to give something of yourself, even when you feel empty. She pressed her face into Grover's warm fur, whispering, "Thank you for saving me, buddy." He sighed, shifting closer as if to say, "We saved each other." Outside, the city lights shimmered in the snow. Inside, Natalie felt at peace. She had learned, finally, that healing doesn't always arrive with noise or grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in a shopping cart, with soft eyes and something to give. Sometimes it's a gentle presence, a wordless companion. A small blue elephant passed from one wounded heart to another, and in that quiet legacy, Natalie knew there was endless hope. Healing doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes in a shopping cart, with soft eyes and something to give.